Every single day, someone is writing the story of your life for you. Right now, as you watch this video, decisions are being made about who you are, what you're capable of, and what your future looks like. The scary part, you probably don't even realize it's happening. Your boss decides you're not leadership material after one bad meeting. Your friend tells everyone you're unreliable because you canceled plans twice. A single social media post gets twisted and suddenly defines your entire character. Here's the brutal truth that most people never figure out. If you're not actively controlling your own narrative, someone else is doing it for you, and they're probably not doing you any favors. Machiavelli understood something 500 years ago that most people still don't get today. He knew that reality isn't what actually happens. Reality is what people believe happened. The person who controls the story controls everything. Think about it. Two people can experience the exact same event, but whoever tells their version first and tells it better gets to decide what that event means. This isn't about lying or manipulation. This is about understanding that every situation has multiple angles, and the person who frames it first wins. You've been taught to let your work speak for itself, to stay humble, to let others draw their own conclusions. Meanwhile, people who understand narrative control are getting promoted, building stronger relationships, and shaping how others see them every single day. They're not necessarily smarter or more talented than you. They just understand that perception is reality, and they've learned how to shape that perception deliberately. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how to take control of your own story before someone else writes it for you. Number 1. The pre-frame advantage picture. This scenario, two employees make the same mistake at work. One gets fired, the other gets promoted 6 months later. What made the difference? The person who got promoted had already established a narrative about themselves as someone who learns from challenges and grows stronger through adversity. When the mistake happened, their boss didn't see failure. They saw a learning opportunity for a valuable team member. The person who got fired, they had no narrative foundation. Their mistake became their entire story. This reveals something most people never understand about success. The winners in life don't just react to what happens to them. They set up the story before anything even occurs. They plant seeds in people's minds that will grow into favorable interpretations later. Think about the last time someone disappointed you. Now think about someone else who disappointed you the same way, but you gave them the benefit of the doubt. What was different? The second person had already established a context that made you interpret their actions more generously. Every interaction you have is building toward future moments when your reputation will either save you or sink you. The person who understands this creates what I call invisible armor around their reputation. When problems arise, this armor protects them. When opportunities come up, this armor makes them the obvious choice. But here's what most people miss. This armor isn't built during the crisis. It's built long before the crisis ever appears. Smart people understand that perception has momentum. Once people start seeing you a certain way, they look for evidence to confirm that view. If you wait until something goes wrong to start managing your image, you're already fighting an uphill battle. The narrative has already been written, and you're stuck trying to rewrite it instead of writing it from the beginning. Every conversation you have is a chance to plant seeds for future situations. When you mention past challenges you've overcome, you're not just sharing history. You're preparing people to see your future challenges as temporary setbacks rather than permanent failures. When you highlight your problem-solving approach, you're setting up future problems to be seen as opportunities for you to demonstrate your skills rather than reasons to doubt your abilities. The most successful people I know treat every interaction like they're writing the first chapter of a story that will be judged later. They know that today's casual comment becomes tomorrow's character reference. Today's small demonstration of integrity becomes tomorrow's reason someone trusts them with something bigger. Today's example of how they handle pressure becomes tomorrow's proof that they can handle even more responsibility. This is strategy number 1 out of 5 powerful techniques that will completely transform how others see you and how you shape your own reality. The pre-frame advantage means you stop reacting to your circumstances and start creating the context that will determine how your circumstances are interpreted. You become the author of your own story instead of letting others write it for you. Number 2, the narrative anchor technique. Last week, a friend told me about getting called into her boss's office. Her boss started the conversation by saying the department was struggling and changes needed to be made. My friend could have waited to hear where this was going and then defended herself. Instead, she immediately said something that changed everything. She said, "I've been thinking the same thing, and I have some ideas about how we can turn this around." Suddenly, she wasn't someone who might be part of the problem. She became someone who was already thinking about solutions. This demonstrates something powerful about how conversations work. The first interpretation that gets planted in someone's mind becomes the anchor for everything that follows. Most people wait to hear the full story before they respond, but by then, the other person's narrative has already taken root. Smart people don't wait. They drop their own narrative anchor first, and everything else gets measured against their interpretation instead of the original one. Here's what most people don't realize about difficult conversations. The person who defines the situation first usually wins, even if they're not the one who started talking. When someone begins to frame a situation negatively, you have about 10 seconds to redirect the entire conversation. Miss that window and you'll spend the rest of the time fighting against their version of reality instead of establishing your own. Think about the last time someone criticized something you did. If you immediately got defensive, you accepted their frame. You let them define the situation as one where you did something wrong, and now you need to justify yourself. But what if you had responded differently? What if you had acknowledged their concern and then reframed the entire situation around your decision-making process or your learning mindset or your commitment to getting better results? The most skilled people I know never accept negative frames. When someone says they made a mistake, they immediately reframe it as a learning experience that will make them stronger. When someone points out a weakness, they reframe it as an area where they're actively developing new skills. When someone questions their judgment, they reframe it as an opportunity to explain their thought process and demonstrate their analytical abilities. This isn't about denying reality or making excuses. This is about understanding that every situation has multiple valid interpretations, and the person who presents the most compelling interpretation first usually gets to control how the entire situation is remembered and discussed later. Your interpretation becomes the lens through which everything else is viewed. The key is timing and conviction. You can't hesitate or sound uncertain when you drop your narrative anchor. People can sense when you're not confident in your own interpretation. But when you respond immediately with a clear, compelling alternative perspective, something interesting happens. People start to see the situation through your eyes instead of through their own initial reaction. This is technique number 2 out of 5 that will revolutionize how you handle challenging situations. The narrative anchor technique means you never let someone else's interpretation of events go unchallenged. You always have a more powerful story ready to deploy, and you deploy it fast enough to redirect the entire conversation in your favor. Number 3, the context bridge method. Here's something that happened to me that completely changed how I think about reputation. I was working on a project that went terribly wrong. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. I could have just apologized and tried to fix the problems. Instead, I did something different. I connected this failed project to a pattern of me taking on challenging assignments that others avoid. Suddenly, the failure wasn't evidence that I couldn't handle responsibility. It became evidence that I was the person leadership trusted with their most difficult challenges. This reveals something crucial about how people form opinions about you. They don't judge isolated incidents. They look for patterns. But here's the secret. You get to decide what pattern your actions fit into. Every situation that happens to you can be connected to multiple different patterns about who you are. The person who controls the context controls which pattern people see. Most people treat each situation like it exists in a vacuum. Something goes wrong, and they focus entirely on fixing that one problem. Something goes right, and they enjoy the moment but don't leverage it. They miss the bigger opportunity to shape how people interpret their overall character and capabilities. They let random events create random impressions instead of deliberately connecting each event to a larger, more favorable story about who they are. Smart people understand that every situation is a chance to reinforce the narrative they want people to believe about them. When they face a setback, they don't just solve the problem. They connect it to their resilience, their learning mindset, or their willingness to take on difficult challenges. When they achieve success, they don't just celebrate. They connect it to their consistent work ethic, their strategic thinking, or their ability to deliver results under pressure. The most successful people I know treat their reputation like a museum. Curator treats a collection. Every new piece that comes in gets carefully placed in the context that makes the whole collection more impressive. A mistake becomes evidence of their willingness to take risks. A success becomes proof of their consistent excellence. A conflict becomes demonstration of their leadership skills. A collaboration becomes proof of their team-building abilities. This requires a shift in thinking that most people never make. Instead of seeing events as things that happen to you, you start seeing them as materials you can use to build the reputation you want. Instead of hoping people will draw the right conclusions about your character, you actively guide them toward the conclusions that serve your goals. The key is authenticity within strategy. You're not making up false connections or creating fictional patterns. You're highlighting real aspects of your character and connecting genuine events to legitimate interpretations of what those events reveal about you. You're simply being intentional about which true things people notice and remember. This is strategy number 3 out of 5 techniques that will transform how others perceive your character and capabilities. The context bridge method means you never let good or bad events stand alone. You always connect them to larger patterns that reinforce the reputation you're building, turning isolated incidents into compelling evidence of who you are and what you're capable of achieving. Number 4. The perspective. Pyramid. Something fascinating happened during a meeting I attended last month. A team member mentioned that their project was delayed by 2 weeks. One person at the table saw this as a minor scheduling adjustment. Another person saw it as a significant setback that would impact the entire quarter. A third person saw it as a defining moment that revealed problems with the team's planning process. Same delay. 3 completely different levels of significance. The person who controlled which level everyone focused on controlled how the entire situation was handled. This illustrates something powerful about influence that most people completely miss. Every event exists simultaneously at multiple levels of importance. You can zoom in and make something appear huge, or zoom out and make it appear tiny. You can frame it as a small detail in a larger success story, or as a major milestone that deserves serious attention. The person who controls the zoom level controls how much energy and resources get devoted to that situation. Think about your last performance review. Your boss probably mentioned several things you did well and a few areas for improvement. But how much time did you spend talking about each item? Which items got framed as minor details and which got framed as major focus areas? The person who controlled that framing controlled your entire development plan for the next year. They decided which aspects of your performance would shape your future opportunities and which would be forgotten by next month. The most influential people I know are masters at adjusting the perspective level to serve their goals. When they make a mistake, they zoom out to show how it fits into their overall track record of success. When they achieve something good, they zoom in to highlight its significance and implications. When they want resources devoted to their priorities, they frame those priorities as major strategic initiatives. When they want to minimize attention on someone else's priorities, they frame those as minor operational details. This isn't about manipulation or deception. This is about understanding that significance is not inherent in events themselves. Significance is created by the context and perspective through which events are viewed. A 2-week delay could legitimately be seen as insignificant if it doesn't impact other critical deadlines. The same delay could legitimately be seen as highly significant if it reveals systematic problems that need immediate attention. The key is strategic perspective selection. Before you respond to any situation, you should ask yourself what level of significance serves your goals. Do you want this treated as a crisis that demands immediate action and resources? Frame it as a defining moment with major implications. Do you want this treated as a routine matter that doesn't require special attention? Frame it as a minor detail in the context of larger successes. People follow your lead on how seriously to take things. If you present something as monumentally important, they'll treat it that way. If you present something as a small bump in the road, they'll move past it quickly. Your ability to control the perspective level gives you tremendous power over how much attention, energy, and resources get directed toward different situations. This is technique number 4 out of 5 that will revolutionize your ability to influence how situations are handled and remembered. The perspective pyramid means you consciously choose whether to zoom in or zoom out on events based on what level of significance serves your interests and goals, giving you control over how much importance others attach to different aspects of your story. Number 5. The story completion strategy. A colleague recently told me about a presentation that went badly. He said the technology failed, half his slides didn't work, and the audience seemed distracted. Then he stopped talking. He left the story hanging without an ending. So what do you think happened next? Everyone who heard about it filled in their own conclusion. Most assumed it was a disaster that hurt his reputation. But here's what actually happened. He adapted brilliantly, turned the technical problems into opportunities for audience interaction, and got more engagement than he'd ever achieved with a normal presentation. The ending completely changed the meaning of the story, but he never told anyone the ending. This reveals something critical about how people process information about you. When you leave stories unfinished, people write their own endings, and they usually don't write endings that make you look good. Human brains hate incomplete narratives. When you don't provide the conclusion, people will create one, and their conclusions are typically influenced by their existing biases, their current mood, and whatever assumption requires the least mental effort. Most people accidentally sabotage themselves by starting stories they never finish. They mention challenges they're facing, but never follow up with how they resolved them. They talk about problems they encountered, but never explain what they learned or how they grew from the experience. They bring up conflicts or difficulties, but never close the loop on how things turned out. Each unfinished story becomes a negative assumption in someone else's mind. Smart people understand that narrative control means never leaving interpretation to chance. When they mention a challenge, they always include how they overcame it or what they learned from it. When they discuss a mistake, they always explain what it taught them and how it made them better. When they bring up a conflict, they always describe how they handled it and what positive outcome resulted. The most successful people I know treat every story like a complete package that includes setup, challenge, and resolution. They never mention problems without solutions. They never discuss failures without lessons learned. They never bring up difficulties without explaining how those difficulties revealed their character or capabilities. They control the entire narrative arc from beginning to end. This applies to ongoing situations too. If you're working on something challenging, don't just mention that it's difficult. Explain your approach to handling the difficulty. If you're learning something new, don't just mention that you're learning. Explain what insights you're gaining and how they're changing your perspective. If you're facing uncertainty, don't just mention the uncertainty. Explain how you're managing it and what you're discovering in the process. The key is always providing the frame for interpretation. Instead of saying, "This project is really challenging," say, "This challenging project is teaching me skills I never would have developed otherwise." Instead of saying, "I made a mistake," say, "I made a mistake that gave me valuable insight into how to handle similar situations better in the future." Instead of saying, "There was a conflict on the team," say, "There was a conflict on the team that I helped resolve, and now we're working better together than ever." People remember conclusions more than details. If you control how your stories end, you control what people take away from every interaction with you. If you let stories remain unfinished, you lose control over what people think and remember about your experiences and character. This is the fifth and final technique that will completely transform how others perceive and remember your experiences. The story completion strategy means you never leave people guessing about how things turned out. You always provide the ending that serves your reputation and reinforces the narrative you want people to believe about your character and capabilities. These 5 techniques represent a fundamental shift in how you approach every interaction and every situation in your life. You now understand that narrative control isn't about manipulation or deception. It's about taking responsibility for your own story instead of letting others write it for you. It's about being intentional with your reputation instead of hoping people will draw the right conclusions on their own. The pre-frame advantage teaches you to set context before events unfold. The narrative anchor technique shows you how to redirect negative interpretations immediately. The context bridge method helps you connect every situation to favorable patterns about your character. The perspective pyramid gives you control over how significant events appear to others. The story completion strategy ensures people remember the conclusions you want them to remember. Starting today, you have the tools to shape how others see you, remember you, and think about your capabilities. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to reinforce your reputation. Every challenge becomes a chance to demonstrate your character. Every success becomes evidence of your consistent excellence. You're no longer at the mercy of other people's interpretations and assumptions. Your story is too important to leave to chance. These techniques give you the power to write it yourself. Use them wisely, use them consistently, and watch how dramatically your influence and opportunities begin to expand. The narrative of your life is in your hands now. Make it count. The next video the algorithm chose for you isn't random. It's your next tactical upgrade. Click it now and continue your silent ascent.